Let's talk about how to write more effectively. As a copywriter, marketer, or business development professional, your communications are the power of your presence. I'm Justin Hitt from Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. If someone reads your sales letter or any kind of communications and instantly understands it, is ready to take action, feels that you're a credible source, all these things are the desires of your writing. You want to write in such a way that your listener or your reader, and I don't differentiate between written word and spoken word. If you've got written words, you can turn it into spoken word. If you've got spoken word, it can be transcribed to become written word. But that communications in of itself must be clear and easy to follow. And in order to get there, editing is critically important. It doesn't matter whether you're writing a speech, a sales letter, lead generation piece, or even a complete book. Always start with the end in mind. Understand that audience. So first you're going to know your audience. Understand that big idea that you want to deliver to that audience. And then from there, build out the problems, the pains, the solutions, the advice, the content of your materials. Now, it's very often easier to start in the middle with the content. But if you don't understand your audience, so for example, an executive level audience cares more about the why we're doing something rather than the technical details of how, yet a implementer or a technical audience might want to know more about the technical reasons or the technical tools rather than the why we're using those tools. It's a common thing I see online is there's a lot of talk about the latest, greatest tool. And then of course there's an affiliate link, but it doesn't tell you why the tool is necessary. So I'm telling you right now that the reason you edit is to go ahead and take all the rough corners off of your research, off of your audience, off of your big idea to make things more concise and present for the particular audience. So you're going to come back and say, as you're writing an outline, and you're starting adding pieces to that outline, you're going to ask the question, does this speak to my audience? Does it speak consistently across the material? So you're going to write out an outline, you're going to fill in that outline, and then you're going to read through that outline, not for grammar or language or anything like that. You're now reading the first draft for how do we organize this so it's relevant to our audience. Now, the big idea is a great way of doing that. If you have a key and central theme, that does help drive the consistency across the materials. It helps you determine what materials you should keep and what materials you should remove. But ultimately, if you just basically get every word on a page, I like to use index cards. Get every word on an index card. In each index card is a single idea. That way you can organize the index cards on what's called a storyboard. You can have a big board up on the wall and you can group ideas together. And then from each of those groups, you now have some draft to start putting in place. And by the way, I'm starting the editing process in what most people call that draft, that rough. Do you know why? Well, the first pass of editing is about relevance to our audience, relevant to our thesis and our idea. And the second draft of writing, once you've got a rough, is about proofing it with that audience. So we're going to have a similar process, but we're going to take it there in two parts. So again, first part, you got your outline, you're filling in the blanks, you're doing your relevant research, you're challenging assumptions in the context of your audience, and then you are getting things built into paragraphs or chunks of information. Now, most people are going to say, well, what tools do we use to do this? I'm going to say an index card. It's just simple that way. This extended outline then is tested against the big idea or the reason why you're even writing it in the first place. Are you writing a sales letter? Are you writing a special report? Are you writing a persuasive presentation? Do you want people to give donations? Whatever the reason, that's what we're getting out of the way in this extended outline. Then you're going to take a break. And then what I like to do, which works really well, is use some kind of webinar, some kind of presentation to do kind of a peer review. So you could set up, and I'm talking in the marketing world here, you can set up a lead generation piece on the big idea, generate leads, offer those leads a webinar. In the webinar, take your bulky outline, your fleshed out outline, do a 15, 20-minute presentation about the background and the problem and the reason why they're on the call and what they stand to benefit from the concept or topic. And then you can go in for 15, 20 minutes and teach the 3 core ideas. You let them know there's 10 core ideas, but here's the 3 ones that get you started. And then at the end, you have a Q&A session, you have a survey, you have some kind of interaction to get that first review of your outline. Now, all this put together becomes the fodder or the input to your larger final draft. And now for a lot of you folks, I know this is different because I'm taking a concept of marketing and interlaying it with an editorial process. Too many marketers make the mistake of thinking editing is like writing a novel. It's not. The earlier you can generate leads with your concept, the better you're going to have a chance to get feedback from those leads to write your final. And essentially, this almost writes itself. Now that you've got the feedback from an audience, it is possible your big idea didn't generate any leads at all. We don't write for us. We write for the audience. You're going to have something to work with. So you take that outline, chop it up, organize the chunks in a logical order that matches that audience, that's congruent with the big idea, and now you just write. You'll end up with a first draft pretty quickly. Now we go back to the editing process. We read it again for consistency and alignment with our audience. But now we start looking at readability. Are there any unanswered questions? Are the sentences short, concise, and to the point? Are we using language that's appropriate for that audience? Are we moving towards the core objective of the material? So in the case of a sales letter, are we setting up the offer? Do we have appropriate reason why? Do we talk about the benefits? Are we talking about how to do something? Well, that's not appropriate for a sales letter. Convert that into why we do it a certain way. What makes it different? We're not worried about length. We're not worried about anything other than clarity and consistency. Now, there is a part of this where you might have done some headline research. Here's where you start inserting the headlines. So you might have a paragraph that describes something and you're really thinking about that paragraph, and really it could be a bullet point, simple bullet point. You might have talked for 10 minutes in your rough about the importance of writing clearly and concisely, and you boil that down to imagine someone reads your content and instantly falls in love. You can kind of start working out the kinks. We're now thinning out the materials. In the first editing phase, it's about getting context. It's about getting bulk. The second part is about getting focused and concise on the outcome you want. You want some kind of change management system. So as you're making these modifications, you've got tracking changes on. You've also got your original manuscript or your original broad outline available. What I do, and everybody's different, is I get that first bulky outline done. So it's an outline and it has little descriptive paragraphs kind of selling the outline. To me, I have the transcript of a webinar or an event or a presentation. I have audience profiles. I'll lay that all out on a table, print it out, lay it out on a table, and then I will sit down on the computer and just start writing the other materials or editing my bulk materials into that first draft. But the first draft isn't pages of text. It's a chunk from here. It's a paragraph from there, all put in the right order for the audience so that they're getting the information in a consistent and a reliable way. You're also going to work on the second readership path, just the headlines. If I just read the headlines, if I just read the bullet points, would I get enough information to take the action? You're going to track all these changes in some kind of change management system, and then you're going to take a break. Okay, you're going to get away from the materials. Now, here's where it's a little bit different. You're going to take those finished materials. You're going to get them in the best format you can get them in. Okay, so you've gotten readability out of the way. You're using terminology that's appropriate to the audience. You've gotten a lot of the materials chunked down into understandable formats, so you've taken the long-windedness out. Now you're going to get that in front of your audience. Now, here's something great. If you did the first part and generated leads, now you have something to release to them for feedback. So you got some leads, you did that initial presentation to proof and test the idea, to get the questions and feedback. Now you've written a first draft. you can do what's called a pre-release or a pre-publish. Now, if you're writing a sales letter for a client, this is where you pitch them the importance of breaking down that sales letter into lead generation pieces to start building up a larger audience to finally introduce the sales letter itself. But you're now generating leads. You're getting them this report standalone, not you presenting, not you showing slides, not you doing anything other than giving it to them standalone. I like to give it to them in a special report format. Hey, just released special report on how to speak more clearly and concisely. 28 pages teaches you how to X, Y, and Z. You pay for advertising to get those leads on that list. You get them the pre-release. You say, look, this topic was so important. I want to get you the pre-release on this. It's not a perfect document, and we'd love to have your questions, but I'm getting it to you right now. And what will happen is they'll get that sales letter as a special report, and they'll start asking questions, or they're engaged. The question you're really looking for, by the way, is how do I buy this? How do I get involved? But ultimately, that's your peer review stage. In the sales and marketing world, it has no value for you to read it to your coworkers or to have another copywriter look at it. You really want to have that engagement with the customer. Now, I understand it's easier to do when you're writing for yourself than it is writing for a client. Clients don't necessarily want to screen a sales letter that way because it kind of lets the cat out of the bag in a sense. Sometimes they'll want to do like a workshop. They'll have people come in and they'll have them read it and give their feedback. But I really like to put the feet to the fire. I like to digest that sales letter into lead generation pieces, even if those lead generation pieces are offering, let's say you're writing a test against the control, and your test is written, and you start writing lead pieces. You can drive to the previous control while you're finishing off this letter to get the feedback. And then after you get a certain number, 300, 500, whatever pieces of feedback. Actually, if you get 100 pieces of feedback, that's great. You get 300 to 500 distribution, that's good too. But ultimately what happens is when you launch that sales letter, it's a warm launch versus a cold launch because of the editorial process generating leads, getting feedback from actual readers, and then ultimately incorporating that feedback into your final draft that's then released. Now, again, a lot of clients are looking for, hey, write me a sales letter, and they want you to just give them a finished sales letter. You have to help them understand the value of this, the fact that you're going to generate leads before the sales letter is even done. And they're going to say, well, what do we give these leads? Well, point them to the product you already have. Point them to what you've got, which, by the way, sets up a basis for comparison, because if they point these leads to a letter they already have and people purchase, then anything you create with the feedback of the people who purchase is going to be better than what they had, and you're going to get growth. But if you see that there's no sales, then there's something up, or it doesn't generate leads, something's up. But again, your editorial process is more about warm starting that marketing, getting that audience identified, clearly tested against, your assumptions tested against. And then when you release your your report, your book, your sales letter, whatever the larger piece of material is, that audience is already primed. And now you can take an audience match, for example, and then go straight into paid media. You can take an audience match and then go buy mailing lists. You can test this on a segment. Some clients have had lists of like 1 million people on their list. You can test it with a segment and then roll it out in their house list before you then put it out in the public. There's a lot of ways to approach it. The key to understanding, though, is this approach starts in your editorial process, not after you've written the completed piece. It is entirely possible your big idea doesn't match that audience. And if you're not testing that big idea against the audience on the way to the final draft, then you might end up with a final draft with no audience. Does this make sense to you? I know it's different. It's unusual. It is more of an information publishing approach than it is a just write and hope approach. Now, you might be working with a client who's given you 2 or 3 really good controls, and yes, they've already done what I've described, and you can rewrite their controls into this new material. But from a consulting perspective or a copywriting or marketing agency perspective, you still want to pitch them warm start lead generation. Because they might already be doing that. And that could give you access to create surveys or other revenue generating activities that would ultimately help you create a better piece of copy. Now, another thing that happens here when we're interacting with actual live clients, your inner circle clients get a preview of this certain type of topic or big idea. When you're doing this, you're actually building up customer relationships while getting feedback, while getting, somebody's going to come up to you and say, that sounds really great, but I really wish we could do such and such. This is going to help you tune, because there's a little product development here. But ultimately, this is about your editorial process being integrated with your market research, being integrated with your lead generation, and being able to launch in a timely fashion. So working with your clients or working with an audience, it sets that time frame hard and fast. So I think a lot of this is worked into Jeff Walker's product launch formula, where you're doing like a seed launch, and you could be starting from scratch and you get that warm idea out there. But also you could be using previous controls who've already done this work and now kickstarting it with the lead generation, kickstarting it with your reviews, and driving forward. Now, when I do an editorial, so when a client says, hey, I want to pay you to edit my materials or give me critiques, I kind of follow the same path. I'm going to look out there to see, are people generating leads around this topic? If they are, those are some lists you can rent. Can I clearly understand the audience? Can I read this material and know who they're writing to? And when I read this material, if I read it out loud to a child, would I be stumbling and tripping all over myself, or would that child be confused? These are things that we work into our editing. Now, I know, again, it's contrarian, it's different. It's not the same old you hear everywhere else, because I'm not writing a novel. I'm writing a persuasive sales letter. I'm writing an informational report. I'm writing a technical manual for a client. I want that, the client might love it, but if their end user can't benefit from it, then I have failed both the client and the end user. So if you have questions about this method, I do have a report or a little program about collaborative editing. This kind of thing can be divided over several types of people. You can have researchers and readers and editorial staff. That's if you're a bigger group, you might do that. But again, it doesn't cost you anything to have your customers involved in this process. And when you do, you get a much better end result. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. This has been about a unique and unusual approach to focusing on editing, which actually creates more sales, more profit, and more growth. Whether you're doing this for your clients or you're doing this for yourself, it really is about that big idea, matching that audience with such congruency that when the audience reads it, they know they're in the right place. They know that you are the one, and whatever advice you give is the advice they take. And that's where you want to be, writing copy that sells. Thanks for listening. Ask your questions at www.adbriefings.co.uk. Until next time, I'm Justin Hitt.